Hello, my name is AC Jedi or Alan Cross, the cat with no teeth, and this is part two of the Introduction to Philosophy lecture series. It ties in with the course, so there's information if you go to the second year of the course, and we're going to deal with the philosophy of mind, which might sound like a daunting thing, but we're going to have a go. So, the philosophy of mind broadly speaks about questions to do with consciousness and with the status or the ontological status or the existing status of the mind, and how it ties in with the spiritual status of the mind. And there tends to be a dichotomy between the physical and the metaphysical or spiritual, if you would refer to it as that. And so we'll start off with consciousness. Now, some of the questions asked in the philosophy of mind were, what am I? What is the mind? What is me? And you can look into the information on Freud to do with describing the operations of psychology, but namely the id, the ego, and the superego and their interrelationship. But if you look at actually in a philosophical sense, what am I? What ontological epistemological status am I? It's a more complicated question. So and what are we? Because I mean, now we've got the internet, we've got a great understanding of computers being linked together, but mankind has been linked together or interrelated with language for time immemorial. So what are we as a consciousness on top of what am I? And can computers be conscious, or can they achieve consciousness? To put it in a Turing-esque mode, is consciousness an evolutionary mistake? Now, this is something we'll approach to do with Charles Darwin, I think it's to do with evolutionary biology. But anyway, let's start right off. And you'd also, just to tie in, does God make mistakes? If we are essentially a mistake of evolution, does God make them? And so let's start off with Darwin wrote a number of texts to do with evolutionary biology, where Darwin studied a great deal of time at the Galapagos Islands, at the great diversity of species upon such a small geographic place. And Darwin came up with theories to do with how such variation came from essentially a limited genome or more limited genomes. And he described how genes evolved through genetic variation, namely through their success and failure over longer periods of time. The often quoted quote, "survival of the fittest," was actually quoted by a biologist who seems to have quite kind of brutally decontextualized Darwin into some kind of sort of more short-term view, whereas Darwin looked at the evolution of genes over a longer period of time, and therefore it's a bit of a misnomer to think in terms of a shorter period of time in some senses. But in other senses, if genes are passed on and are successful, the shorter term does relate to the longer term. So could consciousness have been a lucky accident that happened, that persisted in a Darwinistic sense, like an advantage that predominated and started dominating a species' genus or evolution? And where could God fit into a Darwinistic point of view? Because a lot of Darwinists sort of focus more towards an atheistic or an agnostic point of view, that God isn't necessary, that we all evolved from the soup in this Darwinistic formula, and God really is something that people spiritually hold on to, like a children's fairy story, for example. God is not necessarily part of the equation, but Adam and Eve kind of posits that story of Adam and Eve and the fall of man. It kind of posits that man was in some way pre-existing to a degree, rather than coming directly evolving out of a soup. But I mean, you can interpret Adam and Eve in different ways, in terms of Adam and Eve teaching us lessons about humanity and about a deeper metaphor for the creation of mankind, and with God being an antecedent party and Adam and Eve being the earliest incarnations of man's consciousness. People speak about the primordial Eves, or the tracing back the genetic material on the mother's side back to a finite number of tribes that came out of Africa, and there's some migration and accounting for genetic variation and so forth. But if you conceive of God as a creator or prime mover, God predetermined this evolutionary event would occur. God's like the guiding hand in the development of the universe, but also the protagonist, the imbuer of meaning, the creator of order within seeming chaos. And so God predetermined that evolution would have such parameters. And you've got the Christian idea of providence, namely that God is this guiding hand that is putting the good and the love of mankind into our lives, and that that God's created this universe, but because it's of God's creation, it has a spiritual meaning and a spiritual sense, and that spiritual sense is, as Jesus said, of a love of mankind. Robinson Crusoe is a good example of providence, if you have to understand from a Protestant theological point of view, because when the Protestants rejected the Catholic Church, they saw being a Christian, being a good person, as going beyond a church, and the whole world being like a church. And if you're a pagan, you believe that spirituality is in the world beyond a church. And so I'm not saying they were necessarily pagans, but it links in with the idea of the earth being having a divine or spiritualistic nature. And therefore in the story, Robinson Crusoe has two choices in life. He can either follow the path his father says, the safe and the medium path, or he can go more for, as Hamlet would say, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune, the more unpredictable life. And he follows the unpredictable life, as the youth often does, but he ends up shipwrecked after being taken into slavery, and his whole ship's been destroyed, and some miracle he's survived and got waterlogged onto the beach. And he suddenly feels that God's forgotten about him, that he's in some way been cast out of this caring paternal figure that his father portrays in the play. But then, not the play, the book. But then he sees some ears of corn that survive on the beach from the ship, that seem to have almost miraculously been there. The probability of the corn surviving is very low, and therefore this is a metaphor for providence. In this massive, chaotic, largely empty universe, there's a sense of order and predetermined love of mankind and animals too, I would argue. But so God programmed the good in the world, and giving us the seed-bearing plants in the Bible. This is all part of God's love and sustenance of mankind. Then we get on to another thinker called Alan Turing, who most famously won the Second World War, which is quite an achievement for British intelligence and so forth. But he won the war by cracking the Enigma code, the main defence line of the German forces, and the sort of information that coordinated all the attacks against the Allies. So how did he crack the Enigma code? Well, this is my rendition. You may get a different rendition elsewhere, but he worked out that even though the numbers that the Enigma code was computing were mathematically insolvable, really nasty numbers, the weakness was that human life and human reasoning isn't one of those numbers in that sense. It's not a mathematically hypothetical, unbreakdownable number. That when you overlaid human reasoning and human language onto this mathematical fog of encryption, that Turing worked out that he could do this mismatch, narrow down the human mathematics of the matter from the machine's randomizing sort of vicious mathematical encryption, and therefore you had two types of reasoning coexisting, and this was the weakness of the machine, and therefore the limitations of language and the human life and expression, he managed to narrow down the linguistics from the pure mathematics, as it were, and therefore he worked out that you could ascertain repeatable phrases, and from repeatable phrases you could break down letter from number, and this reduced the probabilistic nature of the equations that the machines had to deduce. So now Turing came up with this example called the Turing test. And the Turing test asked, what would a computer have to achieve to prove itself conscious or to have consciousness? And so this is going in reverse, or the other way from how he divided human interaction and linguistics and life from pure mathematics and viciously incommensurable numbers. And so going in reverse, it would say, well, can a computer actually take on this different type of mathematics, this more familiar, this more empathetic, this more human link with the kind of logic and the inferences we use? And computers seem to have a great deal of difficulty doing this, because when you consider human life and all its perfections and imperfections and abilities and disabilities and connotations and linguistic nuance and translation and all these different aspects of us being both very able with our type of reasoning, but also very disabled with our type of reasoning, like our perfections on our flaws. When you actually got to the Turing test, the computers would fall down. Now, the Turing test in its basic form is a computer or person is questioned for a period of time not knowing who it's speaking to, either a computer or a person, and the person has to ascertain or decide whether the computer is conscious after asking it a limited number of questions. And if the computer can fool the person, then Turing argued, well, what is the difference if the computers are able to simulate our reasoning from the kind of raw mathematics that he sort of dug us out of the war with. Now this is a very anthropomorphic idea of life, because if you look at, it deals with the variations in human life and a computer's incapability, but there's also animals, and there's an argument, well, are animals conscious in some sense, and are they conscious in the same sense? And could you even describe them in a sense conscious in the same sense as each other? And therefore consciousness opens up into a broader church of awareness and of engagement with the world. And this is the trouble that the computers had with engaging with the sophistications and the irrational nature of mankind, right? But variations in human life, informalities, inconsistencies, different modes of speaking. It was hard to describe the mathematics in order to actually simulate, or to actually, bring a computer into consciousness, because the modus operandi, or mode of engaging, or the essential, logical nature of a Darwinistic entity, as we are, of an evolving human being with evolving ideas and consciousness and things, we seem to be a lot more flexible and a lot more original thinkers. And if you look at chess computers, the advantage that Kasparov had over Deep Blue was very much that he had the ingenuity, the ingeniousness, and the originality that a computer would find hard to simulate, because basically the computers are limited to the recorded or the existing strategies of describable games. The programmers had studied chess games and programmed all the familiar paths, but Kasparov could just do something so highly original that a computer wouldn't be able to do that autonomously. So therefore, so our main advantages are flaws and our ingeniousness, our originality. And conditions like autism, people have difficulty understanding patterns of language. They make mistakes in patterns to do with the logical reasoning in which they operate, because they have difficulty empathizing or making that emotional connection that gives us that power to be adaptable and to adapt to different speakers and different ways in which we speak. For example, autistics have problems with metaphor, and if you asked an autistic what a literal truth was, they would describe it more as a factual truth or a factionalism. And they don't understand that, I discuss this in my comment section, that a literal definition is only a half description of the word, because there's both a metaphor and a description of it being actual or accurate. And those are the two components of literality. But for an autistic, they would think it was predominantly factual statements that people make, and they wouldn't have the flexibility in order to make that emotional link with metaphors that people do understand at a primal level through example and analogy. And so do computers have an empathy deficiency? Are computers disabled? Is an interesting question. Should they be getting DWP benefits? it's an interesting question, but if you look at Marvin in The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, who's one of my personal heroes, because I feel a lot like Marvin. I remember Marvin gets stuck in the car park at the restaurant at the end of the universe, and he come when they finally return back for him after it's travelled through time a few times. He going back and forwards from the end of the universe. He says, 2 million years in a car park, it's just my luck, because Marvin's prone to. He's got an emotional chip, but it's dysfunctioned in the production of the robot, and he's turned out a pessimistic, highly depressed, and even worse, very unlucky robot. And when you put the two together, I think you have to ask: is Marvin actually normal? Would a computer chip that wasn't programmed like Marvin under his life circumstances, would it be an abnormal type of consciousness? I mean, are we going for the wrong thing with the Turing test? Are we, in order to establish some type of standard of normality? Should we be looking for abnormality as a sign of? Well, it's a Catholic description of consciousness we have, or a broad description of consciousness, to use the sense, because there's a metaphor. You see, an autistic might not pick up on that, but it's the uniqueness of consciousness that is, some sense, what makes us conscious and different from every other consciousness. So, is there such a thing as a combined definition of consciousness, if it's different for everybody? Then we go on to a thinker called Schopenhauer from philosophy, another one of my favourites. You might be noticing a pattern. Schopenhauer speaks of a circle of disappointment. So if you can see it on the screen, the main thing you have to focus on is the circle. And you see, we start off at the beginning of the circle expecting some kind of thing to happen, expecting some kind of pleasure or some kind of moment of clarity in life, some moment of realizing that we're alive, that we're experiencing some moment of experience. So we go around the circle from expectancy, and then we get to our moment of realization. For some people, they might describe this as sex. Somebody might describe it as, the one cigarette that they actually enjoy. Somebody else might describe it as of that moment of happiness where they triumph over the world. But unfortunately, after that, it's a steady slope downhill from the realization to the anti-climax, and then the alienation as we get further away from the realization, and then we're back to expectation again. And so, so we have moments where things that reach some point of realization, but for the great majority of the time, it's either disappointment or unrealized expectations. So there's never any permanence or lasting fulfillment. And you see, the ancient Greeks dealt with this question in philosophy, and they said, what is lasting happiness? Because they had the question, well, what is a good life, and what is it to live a good life? And if you look on the course at Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, he because they were working for aristocrats, for kings, the philosophers, when they first founded the university, and the kings wanted their children to be great kings like them. And so they said to the philosophers, okay, right, we want you to use your wisdom to make our children these wise leaders. And so Aristotle, in his Nicomachean Ethics, describes what the difference between virtue and vice and the Aristotelian mean, which is the perfect point between the two, not too much, not too little. A bit like Goldilocks likes Mummy Bear's bed rather than Baby Bear's bed or Daddy Bear's bed. The middle path, the perfection. And he says, Well, if you go either way, then you're not. Then it's not virtue. It's not being too virtuous or not virtuous enough is not good enough. So it's a bit like a graphic equalizer. You've just got to focus on the traits in your personality that are too much one way or too much another. And the Greeks spoke of a word called eudaimonia, which is, you can see how it's spelt if you like, backwards. Eudaimonia. And eudaimonia is what they described as long-lasting fulfillment, purpose, deeper happiness, and deeper meaning in life. So it's like the thing someone says, oh, that's really what life's about. It's not about, it's not about searching after material goods. It's not about looking for that ultimate high or that ultimate expectation. It's not about trying to indulge yourself so much that you don't enjoy what you're actually doing. It's about the real deeper meaning in life, the things that matter, the longer lasting fulfillment, unlike the short term expectation or excitement, as Schopenhauer spoke of, looking for that fix. For example, smokers, they say, oh, they only really enjoy one cigarette out of, say, 20 or 30, but that's what has the meaning for them. And it seems very sad that they can't see that they're actually being chemically programmed to their own destruction, and therefore that moment of short-term happiness, it doesn't have the long-lasting fulfillment of achieving giving up smoking and actually looking after yourself and doing your lungs a favour and taking care of yourself, and actually thinking of you, searching for that moment in life. It's like searching for that one wave that a surfer gets, that they think, right, this is living. It doesn't last forever, and we don't last forever, and therefore finding a deeper happiness and a deeper meaning, for example, that philosophy might give to you, or relationships, or a project that doesn't negatively destroy you at the same time. Anyway, to sum up, for Thomas Nagel, life has a unique quality. And could a computer feel, understand, appreciate, or experience? Well, we already could said it was a bit of an anthropomorphic definition, and that consciousness and experience goes beyond our species. So could a robot simulate a computer, an animal consciousness, for example? Or, all these things are very much beyond our way of thinking. But I think we can safely say computers are disabled, much like autistics, like a severe autism. And it would be best to understand their consciousness as coming from a point of view of finite limitations, whereas we don't naturally have those limitations in our methodology, in our modus operandi, and we're very difficult to interpret because of flaws and because of great achievement and originality. So don't feel belittled if you don't feel you have a great originality. You do, but everybody in their own way, if you see what I mean. Everybody has strengths and weaknesses. Some might say my strength isn't philosophy, but everybody's entitled to their opinion. And you've got to think for yourself and think of ways to deconstruct what I say and ultimately put to one side in order to understand other people's opinions that you'll get on the course and in life. And then do the same with them until you have an evaluative position in between all those positions, because there's seeds of genius in all, as they say. Right, so animals are different, and in some sense, for Nagel, we're locked out of the qualia of animals. We can't really understand animals because they have their unique qualia, and so do we, and so do other people, fundamentally enough, which is why John Rawls' veil of ignorance is so important in political philosophy, in that we, at the limited extent we can understand another human being with different abilities and a fundamentally different quality of experience in life, a different experiential set of wisdoms and quid pro quo, or received wisdom, and essentially a different unique path through life from ourselves. So we're locked out of everything, it appeals, but we understand through empathy and analogy, and those are things that autistic people have great difficulties with. Therefore, computers are disabled, I think we can safely say, and this is why humans and computers are such a powerful team. Thank you very much.